Hello and welcome to Global Business Africa. In the next hour, we'll be bringing you financial news making headlines around the world with a focus on the continent. I'm Hannah Viviers in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi, where it's 9 p.m. It's 2 p.m. in Washington, D.C. and 2 a.m. in Beijing. Wherever you're joining us from, welcome. First, let's take a look at how the markets did today. It was a mixed day for exchanges on the continent. Nigeria and Egypt bucking all that negative sentiment. Egypt's exchange saw the most gains and was up just over 8%. The S&P 500 crawling slightly into negative territory. European shares saw red across the board, due mainly to disappointing reports showing a slower than expected economic rebound. London's FTSE 100 was down 1.3%. Well, let's now take a look at news-making headlines this hour. The economic downturn continues in South Africa in wake of the coronavirus. Somalia opens the auction for 7 oil blocks. And China slams U.S. clean network efforts. We kick off south on the continent, where South Africa's economic downturn extended into last month. Businesses still reeling from the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic reported a slightly less steep in output and new orders. While the pace of job losses also slowed, July still saw the third fastest reduction in employment on record. The IHS Purchasing Managers Index rose 44.9 from 42.5 in June. It's the second increase in a row, but still far below that 50 mark that separates expansion from contraction. Africa's most industrialized economy imposed a hard lockdown in late March to contain the spread of the coronavirus. It has gradually eased curbs on most economic activity. Government forecasts are for gross domestic product to shrink by at least 7% this year. Well, joining us live for more, here's Angelo Coppola, who is in Johannesburg for us, South Africa for us. Thank you for joining us, Angelo. Angelo, stimulus is the buzzword for economies across the globe at the moment. Bloomberg had reported that South Africa had lost more in tax revenue in the first 3.5 months of its fiscal year than it borrowed from the IMF and the African Development Bank combined. Considering that much loss, Angelo, in revenue, how does government plan to fund stimulus for the South African economy?
Well, that's the billion-dollar question, isn't it? At the moment, there's talk of increasing the tax rates for corporates as well as for individuals, bearing in mind, of course, that the corporates and the individuals in this country are probably amongst the highest and most heavily taxed in the world without fail. So that's not going to win too many votes there. There's, of course, value-added tax, or VAT. That could be increased, but that won't win any ANC votes either, since it affects every single purchase besides a few zero-rated products. And with our unemployment rates between 30 and 45%, well, that's also a no-brainer. The economists are telling me, though, that the easiest way to fund any kind of stimulus plan is to create a conducive economic environment. That's the bottom line. And then move out of the way and let the private sector do what they do best. Change things, for example, like less red tape, less taxes, get some regulatory certainty going, and then growth should happen if the country is marketed properly. Hannah?
Angela, and that was what I was going to lead into for my next question. While much of the focus right now is regarding the recent retail and PMI numbers that we're seeing, it's about impact from the pandemic. But even before the recession, Angela, there were huge issues with key fundamentals in South Africa. Taking those issues into consideration, plus the impact of this pandemic, when is significant growth expected to come into South Africa?
I would say that's another billion-dollar question, but based on SARB expectations, it's going to take at least 2 years before any growth rates approach any kind of significant level. At the moment, the expectations and projections for this year are between -10% and -7.2%. That's for this year. It might climb to around 2% for 2021 and then possibly get close to 3% in 2023. So those aren't significant growth rates, but they're at least in the right direction. That's if nothing changes between now and then. On the other hand, of course, if government does keep to its commitment to the IMF and to the other international funders that have provided it with loans, the growth rate could be higher. But it's got to cut public sector debt. or the wage bill. It's got to stop supporting those dysfunctional SOEs, and it's got to stick to its knitting. Of course, it needs its trading partners in the rest of the world to also come to the party. South Africa is very dependent on a growing global economy. And of course, let's not forget the potential, the massive potential of the African Continental Free Trade Area. If that gets going, it offers a huge opportunity for South Africa to increase its growth rates. So there are lots of moving parts there, Hannah.
And so let's talk about the lift in the ban on alcohol and cigarettes, and it continues, and that there's been so much attention on that. We know billions have been lost so far from those bans alone. Are there other key sectors, Angela, which are not back to full operation, but they're not receiving as much attention as the bans on alcohol and cigarettes have received? But when it comes to bleeding money from the economy, they're just as key to the growth of South Africa going forward.
Well, Hannah, perhaps the biggest employer and economic growth multiplier in the country, in perhaps many African countries for that matter, is the tourism sector. It's essentially been closed in lockdown since March 27th. The country's borders remain closed to any regional and international travel, as you know, on the ground and in the air. Domestic business travel was unbanned around 6 weeks ago, but the airlines are reporting around 4% capacity there, so that's not very efficient for them either. Earlier this week, there was no leisure travel allowed. That's now been opened up to people to travel within the provinces that they live in, but not to any other provinces, strangely enough. Anecdotally, of course, people are finding ways around those new regulations, much like they do when it comes to acquiring and finding cigarettes and alcohol, Hannah.
And so let's just go back. I mean, we've talked a lot about the pandemic, but just like you said, and I also mentioned this, just so much of what's happening in South Africa's economy. There was already a recession that was taking place before this pandemic. And last week alone, we saw an estimated 2 billion rand withdrawn by foreign investors. Considering risk aversion right now, Angela, is there concern that the country could continue to lose investment at that scale?
Well, look, the capital flight was always expected, but it had been delayed. And you'll recall that at the last, in fact, it was the last ratings agency that downgraded South Africa just before we entered into that lockdown period. And that was about, 3 months ago now. Money stayed in those local bonds because many of the institutional managers were looking around in the rest of the world for better returns. And that was in a very low return environment. So the money stayed here. But that risk appetite seems to have waned a little now. And those institutional investors may also be just more than a little anxious about whether the government can get its act together and bring that huge burgeoning deficit back under control. We are also only 2 months away from Tito Mboweni, the finance minister's midterm budget policy statement announcements. And some are wondering how and what rabbit Tito is going to pull out of the hat this time around to meet those revenue requirements and targets that he has to fund the fiscus for 2021 and 2022. Hannah?
Angela, thank you so much for that update. Angela Coppola joining us live from Johannesburg, South Africa. Well, let's move to one of South Africa's neighbors, Zimbabwe, which stock market resumed trading this week after a state financial intelligence body concluded its investigation. But 3 dual-listed stocks, including the local unit of Old Mutual, will remain suspended. Zimbabwe's finance ministry ordered the suspension to investigate alleged illegal foreign currency dealing using some listed counters. Here's CGTN's Farai Makutuya with the rest of the details.
Less than $130,000 worth of shares changed hands on the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange's return, a far cry from the previous levels seen before the abrupt halt to trade ordered on June 26th.
Historically, you'd find that the ZSE would trade something between 1.5 to 2 million per day. So that's just gauging from that, and also the movement in the indices, it shows you that activity is quite low. Maybe it will pick up as local institutional investors who actually map what's happening in the market.
Trading resumed minus dually listed counters, global insurance giant Old Mutual, South African cement maker PPC, and Zimbabwe's Seedco. They still remain suspended over allegations that speculators have been using the counter's shares to illegally deal in foreign currency.
Simple market participants that found a way to actually come up with a pricing mechanism, which is something that can be applied on almost any standard product or item that is priced across different markets. As you know, there's the big mark index.
The firms deny any wrongdoing. Their absence robs investors of attractive stock options.
What it means is that you're actually taking away the listed companies. So in terms of market depth, it's actually affected because these are companies that contribute 6-7% to the overall market capitalization. And also these are foreign companies, people like them because, they have regional operations and things like that.
Those three counters are likely to have their listings moved to a new foreign currency denominated exchange, which authorities are planning to set up in the resort town of Victoria Falls. To list on the proposed Victoria Falls Stock Exchange, companies will have to raise capital offshore, a requirement aimed at helping Zimbabwe attract much-needed foreign currency inflows. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Well, Egypt's revenue from the Suez Canal has risen by 4.7% compared with the previous 5 years. Egypt opened an $8 billion expansion of the canal 5 years ago. It was part of plans to boost the economy and restore Egypt's position as an important trade hub. Suez Canal revenue rose to $27.2 billion during the last 5 years, up from $25.9 billion in the 2010 to 2015 period. Since 2015, 90,000 ships transited the Suez Canal, carrying 5.5 billion tons of cargo, up from 4.6 billion tons during the previous 5 years. Egypt plans to double ship numbers and revenue by 2023 compared with pre-2015 levels. Well, Uganda's top mobile operator MTN says it will be listing at least 20% of its shares on the local market in 2021. In July, the South African-owned telco giant renewed its Ugandan license for 12 years. The permit conditions mean the company has to ensure a degree of local ownership by floating shares to the public. Here's CGTN's Michael Baleke with the details.
MTN Uganda says it has started the process and are evaluating their stock before making them available to the general public. The plan is to have the initial public offering in June 2021.
It's an exciting opportunity to further enhance the long-standing relationship that we have with our customers, who now will also have a chance to become shareholder of our company.
In 2018, Uganda passed legislation making it mandatory for national telecom operators to list shares on the local securities exchange. The regulator of the capital markets industry in Uganda says the move by MTN to list will create a vibrant stock market.
I think there's nothing more exciting than going to a customer with a new product, but also giving them a chance to own into the success of a company that is selling that product. So listing for these companies should be a big opportunity for them. They should embrace it, and we look forward to facilitating that as a regulator.
Uganda has 3 telecom firms with national operators licenses. 2 of the companies, a local unit of South Africa's telecom giant MTN Group and a subsidiary of India's Bharti Airtel, are foreign-owned. The sale of the 20% equity stake in MTN Uganda will be restricted to citizens in the 6 East African community states. And while the policy seeks to ensure local ownership of the multinationals, some experts on capital markets argue there is no guarantee that Ugandans will invest. But the regulator predicts the MTN stock could be oversubscribed given the nature and retail liquidity of the telecom company.
One of the challenges we've been facing as a market for a very long time is the lack of listings. So for us, this is a big opportunity.
MTN has also expressed worry that a license limited to 12 years may impact investor and shareholder confidence. But Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni believes if all multinational companies open their shares to the public, it could conserve the foreign exchange, as a portion of the firm's dividend payouts would remain in the country. Michael Baleke, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
It's time now for your company news. Glencore says it is scrapping its dividend to focus on lowering debt as the COVID-19 pandemic forced it to book a $3.2 billion impairment charge. The miner and trader, which had expected to pay $2.6 billion in dividends, say the economic outlook was too uncertain due to the coronavirus crisis to make the payout. The miner posted a net loss of $2.6 billion in the 6 months to June versus earnings of $226 million a year ago. Properco, a subsidiary of the French Development Agency, has dispersed a multi-million-dollar debt financing to Kenya Nuts Company. The deal is the first disbursement of a two-phase financing plan in which I&M Burbridge Capital is the advisor. Still in Kenya, the Intercontinental Hotel has sacked all employees and ended its operations amid the coronavirus economic fallout. The hotel, based in Nairobi, was already struggling before the pandemic outbreak, and last year was declared technically insolvent since it could not service its debt that stood at $6.6 million. Meanwhile, Kenya has lost $740.5 million so far in tourism revenue, about half of last year's total, due to the coronavirus pandemic. And Russia's Sberbank has structured its first trade finance deal with an Islamic bank to supply Russian wheat to Egypt. The deal with Saudi Arabia's International Islamic Trade Finance Corporation will enable it to significantly increase its share in Russian wheat exports in Egypt. Egypt is the world's largest wheat importer and the top buyer of Russian wheat. And those were your corporate headlines. Well, let's take a look at news that's coming up after the break. Somalia opens the auction for 7 oil blocks. And we explore measures being taken to keep Kenya's troubled national carrier in the skies.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sudan. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back. Well, Somalia is expected to announce the winners of its first oil and gas licensing round early next year. The country is offering 7 deep water offshore blocks. They're estimated to be among the most prospective areas for hydrocarbon exploration and production. Authorities had previously planned to offer 15 offshore oil blocks. They, however, cut this down as oil companies started to cut back their upstream projects due to the recent price collapse. Oil and gas exploration started in Somalia around the 1950s and 60s with a total of 70 wells drilled, 80% of which were onshore. Many major companies, including ExxonMobil, BP, Texaco, and Shell, were active in the region at the time. Or for a closer look at the industry and what the latest licensing process means for Somalia, we're joined by our correspondent, Abdulaziz Bello. Abdulaziz, thank you so much for joining us. Abdulaziz, let's just start with the key components that Somalia is looking for when awarding these licenses. What are you hearing?
Well, Hannah, just as you've mentioned, the oil and the gas sector, technically the hydrocarbon sector in Somalia has been existing after Somalia attained independence in early 1960s. It started from the central government way back then that it started creating these industries so that it can be able to revive the hydrocarbon sector that can be able to create a strong economy for Somalia, as well as create job opportunities for the country's young. And just as you've mentioned, Somalia in earlier this year announced that it's going to award the licenses to several companies and multilateral agencies that have applied for investing in the oil and gas sector. It hasn't mentioned the names yet, but many prospective companies have come forward, mainly from Western countries. There have been some countries from the Middle East that have also expressed interest. We have also countries like Turkey that have come out openly saying that they are interested in exploring the oil and gas sector in Somalia. But there's been great developments happening in Somalia in the last week. In Somalia itself, the country created the Somalia Authority. Technically, it's supposed to be the regulatory body for the hydrocarbon industry, and also many pressing interest in the hydrocarbon sector in Somalia, and this has given the Somali government under the current administration by President Farmajo the upper hand in actually creating more support from international multilateral companies like ExxonMobil, who are coming back to the country for the first time in 3 decades. We are finding that many companies that were in Somalia before the conflict are now saying that there's been some developments in the country and that they want to take part in the hydrocarbon sector.
Abdulaziz, we're going to talk about the conflict in a moment, but for now I wanted to ask you if there are plans to process extracted resources within Somalia.
Well, Hannah, there are currently no plans to process any raw materials that will be extracted from Somalia, be it the natural gas or crude oil or regular oil. But mostly Somalia is looking at exporting these raw materials outside to unspecific countries. It hasn't mentioned the countries that it's willing to partner with, but technically most of the companies that will be awarded the contract, they will get the overall say in where these raw materials will be taken for refinery. But Somalia is looking at a possible case study where after 10 to 15 years, after the country finds itself that it has enough natural resources and natural rather hydrocarbon sector, it looks at creating refineries. But before the civil war, there was some prospects of creating pipelines within the country, eventuality that the country might have enough oil and gas that can be able to be distributed within the country, but that has not yet been achieved. So Somalia is currently seeking funds so that it can be able to revive those key industries that were affected during the conflict. But the hydrocarbon sector itself hasn't yet kicked off in Somalia. So Somalia will be looking at billions of dollars before it creates any refinery, and it also needs to get enough assurance that the country can have a lot of capability and also able to secure these refineries so that they don't come under attack from militia groups and militant groups that we have seen in the country.
Abdulaziz, that was going to be my next question, actually, when you talked about conflict, and one of the reasons companies like ExxonMobil and Shell, and they've actually had licensing rights for a really long time and hadn't really, reached the full potential of them being able to explore in Somalia, and one of the reasons had been unrest, had been conflict. So what are you hearing from the government in terms of what they plan to do? Because We talk about this a lot, Abdulaziz, on the program, about terrorism still in the country, that being a huge threat. What are they planning to do in terms of protecting individuals who are going to be working at these fields?
Well, Hannah, the federal government of Somalia, the president recently was speaking to members of parliament, and he was reiterating the need for the country to move back from relying on donor funding to be able to become self-sufficient. And the hydrocarbon sector was one of the key areas that the president was referring to. And the return of big companies like ExxonMobil back to Somalia is going to be a game changer in the hydrocarbon sector in Somalia. What the government of Somalia is insisting is that the country has been through a lot, 30 years of turmoil, and it cannot wait for another 30 years to be able to liberate the country from insurgent group and be able to create more opportunities for its economy and for its young people. So what the president is of the view that there's been a lot of drastic improvements in terms of security in recent years. The national army that is supposed to take over from the African Union troops has done a commendable job in recent years. It has taken, and also it is holding large territories compared to previous years. So this is one of the key areas that the president is seeking to tap, the improvement in security in recent months to lure more oil and gas companies to come and invest in Somalia. But recently we have seen a lot of security developments in the country. Security forces have managed to thwart quite a number of attacks in Mogadishu and in other areas where the government is expecting that oil drilling and the gas will commence. These are areas under the government control. So the government is trying to assure investors that there will be no security challenges in these areas because, one, it's under the control of the government. And after these companies are given rights, the authorities are planning on creating a special unit of security to be able to protect these investors who have come to Somalia to start oil drilling. So it's an enormous challenge to begin with, but Al-Shabaab continues to pose a major challenge in Somalia, even though they've been able to be kept at bay by African Union forces and Somali forces. Technically, they are still a big challenge.
A challenge for the country. Thank you so much for joining us, Abdulaziz Bello, joining us live from Mogadishu, Somalia. Well, let's shift focus now to the aviation sector. The ongoing coronavirus pandemic has depressed the global travel industry. African carriers alone are expected to lose about $6 billion this year in revenue, and Kenya Airways is no exception. The national carrier was already struggling long before the pandemic hit. It posted losses of almost $120 million in 2019. CGTN's Robin Nagila now explores what the government is doing to keep KQ afloat.
As the first Kenya Airways flight from Kigali began its descent into Nairobi last Saturday, after almost 4 months following the outbreak of COVID-19, it was half full. The impact COVID-19's had on the airline became more apparent as it taxied to the apron. Dozens of KQ planes remained grounded. For many of the passengers, they were just glad to be home.
This is awesome. This is awesome. We've been waiting for this.
The captain of the flight, however, was more reflective.
Hopefully, we'll increase our frequency depending on the passenger numbers that come on board.
Like all airlines globally, Kenya Airways has been pushed to the brink by the pandemic. Before COVID-19, the airline was flying to 55 destinations globally, carrying 4 million passengers annually. Since resuming international flights, it's now flying to only 30 destinations.
There has been an extremely suppressed demand going forward. If you look at what we have deployed for our frequency and our destination, it is not 50% of what we were flying before.
The current demand is attributed to passengers who were stranded when countries closed their airspace. Largely dependent on holidaymakers and business travelers who've been forced to stay home because of the pandemic, the airline is now scrambling to remain in the skies.
We cannot keep an airline at 100% when the demand is only 50%. And that is why we need to restructure the airline. So restructure just, the assets, restructure the operations itself, how we operate, and then of course, unfortunately, even for employees, and like you said, it's a very painful thing to do.
The airline projects losses of up to $400 million by the end of 2020. Experts say government support is essential for survival.
We need governments to underwrite loans and to offer state support and to guarantee loans as well and to reduce taxes. Those are the big things. And most governments in Africa are just not doing it. And the bottom line here is that over $30 billion was promised by governments in Africa to support the airline industry. And only $311 million of that amount has been paid out.
Kenya Airways is in the process of being nationalized, and when the turbulence in the industry finally settles, the airline will be hoping this greeting
Welcome on board Kenya Airways.
will continue to welcome passengers on board their planes for years to come. Robert Magilo, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
The World Bank has approved a grant of $45 million to help South Sudan improve access to basic infrastructure and strengthen community institutions. The funds will benefit over 600,000 citizens who live in 21 of the country's 79 counties. It will be implemented by the UN Office for Project Services in close collaboration with the government and other development partners. CGTN's Patrick Oyet reports from Juba.
Rose Manas is a 45-year-old mother of 3. She lost her husband during the 6 years of civil war in South Sudan. Rose is one of the women rebuilding the roads and getting paid for the work as part of the safety net project funded by the World Bank. She says that has enabled her to pay her children's school fees. Rose says had the program come to South Sudan earlier, it could have saved one of her daughters.
Before this project began, my eldest daughter was not going to school because I didn't have money for her school fees. She decided to elope, and she's still a child. It hurts me a lot.
The World Bank channels the money to the United Nations Office for Project Services, or UNOPS, which is implementing the project.
UNOPS is supplementing, is complementing, is supporting government to fight poverty and suffering, including COVID-19. So with the resources we are getting from donors, this project, the Social Safety Net project, is going to extend or expand the number of beneficiaries to cover those who have been affected by COVID-19.
The UNOPS is now looking for extra funds so that it can reach more people across the country with the Safety Net project. UNOPS says at the moment the project is focusing on households such as people living with disabilities, the elderly, pregnant women and those living with HIV/AIDS. South Sudan's government is urging donors to support more projects that would promote self-reliance of the population.
I strongly believe that this project will contribute to significant reduction of poverty among the selected poor and vulnerable households.
The World Bank says the project aims at providing income support to nearly 430,000 people in some of South Sudan's most vulnerable communities over the next 2 years. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
While the U.S. continues to pressure allies to block Huawei from their next generation 5G networks, South Africa is taking advantage of the opportunities the new technology presents. Mobile operators Vodacom, MTN and Rain are already rolling out their 5G networks. This makes South Africa one of the first countries on the continent to adopt the cutting-edge technology, as Smita Naidu now reports.
5G is roughly 10 times faster than 4G and 100 times faster than 3G. Chinese tech giant Huawei partnered with South African telecom operator Rain to roll out the first standalone 5G network in Africa.
What we're seeing in African markets is a strengthening of the relationship between Huawei and local telcos, partly as a result of resistance to American efforts to control global commercial activity. Right now, we're seeing at least 3 of the major operators having rolled out 5G infrastructure, but at this stage, it is only limited to certain urban areas.
Huawei is currently offering both standalone and non-standalone 5G. A standalone network is faster, but more expensive because it needs its own infrastructure. Currently, Cape Town has the only standalone tower through Rain, but 5G is available to the rest of the country via the other networks.
You see this camera right here, it streams at around 11K. And with 5G,
needing all that data, at least we can actually do it at low latency. You can actually even conduct a surgery. Students don't have to watch from the window. They can actually see a live view of what exactly is happening.
The opportunities are plenty, especially for small and medium businesses.
If you think about healthcare and education, those are two massive impacts. And then job creation on its own, 2.2 million jobs potentially being created by 5G networks. $2.1 trillion in GDP growth. On the healthcare side, having that stable network means that you can have remote sessions with patients. It means that you can have, remote operations.
Another key advantage is efficiency. Sending data from one point to another will be faster and easier, improving productivity.
To be quite honest, especially in our continent, and I'm talking Africa now, we've got our own unique challenges, one around infrastructure deployment. We're always lagging behind, the global trends. And with 5G, definitely there's a big opportunities that it can help address some of the challenges that we have in Africa.
There's no doubt the launch of 5G can help to reduce costs and to create better access to connectivity, important steps towards bridging the digital divide in South Africa. Sumitra Nadu, CGT in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Let's take a short break now. When we return, China slams U.S. clean network efforts, and high-end hotels in Italy lure domestic tourists with irresistible packages.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are these stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Turning to China-U.S. tensions, Beijing is sharply criticizing U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's announcement of the Clean Network campaign. Pompeo said the U.S. would move against what he called untrusted Chinese apps from the App Store of U.S. mobile carriers and phone makers. Beijing says that it's a smear and a political manipulation. CGTN's Wang Chui explains.
An intensified effort against China. Not long after its plans to ban TikTok, the U.S. announced an expansion of its Clean Network campaign targeting Chinese tech companies.
With parent companies based in China, apps like TikTok, WeChat, and others are significant threats to personal data of American citizens, not to mention tools for CCP content censorship.
The campaign focuses on 5 critical areas in telecommunications and technology infrastructure, from clean apps to clean cloud, and it aims to prevent Chinese apps and telecom firms from accessing information on U.S. individuals and businesses. China hit back, saying many Chinese companies unilaterally sanctioned by the U.S. are innocent. It insists those products and services are safe.
U.S. politicians keep using the excuse of protecting national security and abusing the country's power to curb Chinese high-tech companies. China firmly opposes this. The action done by the U.S. have no factual basis, and they're smear and political manipulation.
Pompeo gave few details on how the efforts will be carried out. But according to the U.S. State Department, more than 30 countries and territories have joined the campaign. The Trump administration is set on countering the reach of Chinese-made technology in the U.S. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi described the actions by Washington as a textbook case of bullying.
U.S. politicians keep using the excuse of protecting national security and abusing the country's power to curb Chinese high-tech companies. China firmly opposes this. The action done by the U.S. have no factual basis, and they're smear and political manipulation.
The U.S. government has already been cracking down on Chinese technology companies. It has long singled out telecom equipment provider Huawei, encouraging allies not to use its equipment in their 5G networks. As the new science and technology revolution is picking up speed, China said it hopes that the US will give up its obsession with its narrow self-interest and return to the right track of openness and cooperation. Wang Xiwei, CGTN.
Meanwhile, TikTok is planning to spend $500 million on a data center in Ireland. TikTok says a move to within the European Union is part of its effort to prove itself a responsible internet citizen and a trustworthy service provider. The company said the center would create hundreds of jobs and improve the protection of TikTok's user data. The data center is expected to be operational by early 2022. Elsewhere, influencers in India are struggling to re-establish themselves after the government banned about 100 Chinese apps from the country. New app companies are trying to attract influencers to their platforms with lucrative deals, but experts say the businesses are facing a long road to recovery.
Paras Tomar, a journalist turned social media influencer, now has his own beauty and skincare brand. His entrepreneurial journey into the world of beauty began with short videos on social media platform TikTok. After TikTok was banned in India in June, influencers like Tomar, with over 3 million followers, are being chased by Indian apps that aspire to fill in the void.
So for a whole bunch of us, what actually happened is earlier we would probably get paid to do certain kind of videos for brands. But I think the way it suddenly shifted is that a lot of these platforms now want you to make whatever videos you want, but they want you to make sure that you upload at least 30, 40 videos in a month. So from just the perspective of that value for some people, where they're being approached not by brands now, but by platforms, this is a great change.
India has banned more than 100 Chinese apps in the last 2 months, citing a threat to the country's sovereignty and security. Since then, Made in India apps are gaining momentum as the youth are addicted to short video format. The Indian app companies are luring content creators with enticing offers but failing to provide an experience equivalent to TikTok.
For these Indian applications, they're not enjoying the experience. They're not happy with what the content quality they have to offer, because almost everyone is using all these applications. But because all of them are expecting a payout from them, so I don't think it's feasible to keep doing this.
Experts say India has a long way to go to build an app ecosystem.
Nationalistic kind of sentiment that this ban has created may lead to a lot of such users of TikTok and other platforms to get onto the native apps also. But the functionality of the apps and the popularity of these apps will certainly decide how long they are going to stick to the platform.
According to some calculations, the top 100 influencers have suffered a loss of 1,200 million rupees due to the ban. Ravinder Bawa, CGTN, Delhi.
Gold continued scaling higher for the third consecutive session on Thursday. The precious metal extended its new record run to about $2,066 per ounce in trading. Gold had been rallying as investors weigh a weaker dollar and record low U.S. real yields. Some investors also fear that trillions in unprecedented stimulus from central banks could feed long dormant inflationary pressures and are turning to gold for protection. Goldman Sachs says the metal could climb to $2,300 an ounce as investors are in search of a new reserve currency. RBC Capital Markets, on the other hand, puts the odds of a rally to $3,000 an ounce at 40%. Moving on, the Bank of England says the economic shock inflicted by COVID-19 will be less severe than initially feared. That's despite warnings of a weaker recovery and lasting damage for jobs and growth. Leaving interest rates on hold at a record low of 0.1%, the central bank predicts UK GDP to shrink by a fifth in the first half of this year. The projection, however, is less severe than the 14% slump it predicted in May, which would have been the worst crash in nearly 300 years. At the same time, against a backdrop of rapidly rising job losses across the country, the bank has also warned unemployment could double by the end of the year to 2.5 million. Well, to Italy now. High-end hotels in the country are moving away from international booking sites. That's in an effort to attract more domestic tourists during this pandemic. On What's Hot Tonight, we explore how a new website is putting would-be visitors directly in touch with individual hotels that are offering a host of luxury freebies.
Italian hoteliers are rolling out the red carpet, hoping to boost reservations, even as COVID-19 spreads around the world. Since July, high-end hotels have been offering discounts and premium goodies to guests as part of a new online campaign called I Book on the Hotel website. The rules of the nonprofit initiative are simple: better rates than booking websites, ultra-flexible cancellation policies, and special perks, from complimentary wine and valet service to spa treatments and welcome dinners.
They are trusting our initiative, which is in line with our marketing strategy during this unique time. It's helping us a great deal as clients are getting in touch with us directly. And so, not only do they book directly with us, but they also ask for information about Rome, what is allowed and what is not allowed, whether museums are open.
Guests at the 20-room hotel enjoy one of the most exclusive views of the Colosseum right from their terraces. As part of the campaign, Moretti offers complimentary meal at the hotel's panoramic Michelin-star restaurant called Aroma. The Italian Agency on Tourism says from January to July, Italy saw an 81% drop in visits compared to the same period in 2019. Even after the lockdown was lifted, establishments continue to suffer. Palazzo Skanderbeg owner Marina Tolti found herself struggling to fill her 11 luxury apartments. The 15th century palazzo around the corner from the Trevi Fountain has always been a favorite spot for American tourists. But the new initiative is now following Italian vacationers to her rooms for the first time. Totti says the initiative has put her relationship with Booking.com or Expedia in a different light.
At such a difficult time for tourism, we realized this was also a way to reduce the power of online tourism agencies, because hotel owners and anyone in the hospitality businesses have already been hurt by COVID and would have also had to pay commission to online agencies.
The Italian Agency on Tourism predicts that the pandemic will continue to impact revenue, as international tourism is not expected to reach pre-COVID volumes before 2023. Ding Xue, CGTN.
Well, now for a look at today's commodities trade. Brent crude continuing to see that steady rise. Oil today trading at $45.35 per barrel, a 0.4% increase. Gold continuing with those record gains. It was up just over 0.6%. Platinum still enjoying that precious metal status on the back of gold. But copper, though, not managing to shake off that collective concern about how long the global downturn will be. It was down 0.5%. It's time now for us to take a short break and return. Here's what you can expect. Morocco basks in the glory of saffron production.
My family has been doing this artwork for the past 600 years.
My dream is to be a leading player in Africa in spice sector.
Nobody in the region consumes it. Even me cannot afford the vanilla cooking.
What
we've created here is the elegance, the color, the celebration of life.
Well, perhaps you're familiar with saffron. It's a spice used in foods, coloring, medicine, and perfumes. And it's the most expensive spice in the world. It can sell for up to $1,200 a kilogram or $15 for just a couple of grams. Presently, Morocco is a top producer of saffron in Africa. The country produces nearly 7 tons every year. Over 90% of the valuable spice is cultivated in the Taliwin region, which is at the heart of the industry.
الزعفران هو حاجة أساسية في المنطقة، هو المنتوج الوحيد اللي كتعتمد فيه الناس ديال المنطقة، هو الأساس ديالهم فاش كيعتمدوا عليه سنويا. سميتي محمد أزرقي، من مواليد ديال 1989 في دوار إغري، جماعة سيدي حسين، دائرة ديال تاليوين، عملة تارودانس. أنا دخلت في الميدان في 2013 حيت الأصل ديال جدودي من كيديروا ديك الفلاحة ديال الزعفران، وبديت كنعاون الوالد في المنتوج ديالو، كيفاش كيتغرس، كيفاش كيحرثو، كيفاش كيتسقى. من ديك الساعة أنا خدام فيه، كنتعلمو شوية بشوية. ملي كيبداو الموسم ديال الزعفران تقريبا كنخدمو ما بين 15 حتى 30 واحد. الزعفران كنحرثو وكنزرعوه في شتنبر، وكيتسقى في الاول ديال اكتوبر. الجو اللي كيبغي الزعفران كيبغي الجو يكون بارد، الارتفاع، البلاصه اللي فيها الارتفاع كيكون فيها البرد اقل من 7 دوغري درجات، والماء كيبغيه تقريبا على الاقل مره في 20 يوم. كنجمعوا مره واحده في شهر اكتوبر، مره واحده في العام صافي. مرحبا بكم عندنا، مرحبا بكم. حنا بدينا كنقيو الزعفران، كنقادو فيه. فاش جبناه في الجنان، جمعنا كامل في الجنان، حنا جبناه للدار، بدينا كنقيو. كيفاش كنقيو عاوتاني كيتنقى وحده بوحده كيما كيتجمع في الجنان، كيما كيتجمع في الجنان كيتنقى عاوتاني وحده بوحده بحال. والعيالات بزاف اللي كيخدموا هاد الخدمه هما اللي كيخدموها. وملي كنقيوه عاوتاني كنزيدو فيه النقه اللي الا فيه شي زبال ولا طاحت فيه شي طرف ديال شي وريضه ولا شي حاجه بيضاء كتحيل، كيتنقص ليه الجدر شويه، كنقصوا ليه الجدر باش ما يخسرش الكولور ديالو الا نشف. وملي كنساليو كيتنقى كيتقاد، كنديوه لو شوشوار. انا كنخدم لو شوشوار بزاف، هكا كنقادو في الشوشوار باش ينشف وباش تبقى لا كاليتي كيما هي. حيت كاين اللي كينشفو في الظل، كاين اللي كيديروا في الظل، ولكن الظل كيشد الوقت شويه بزاف، والمشكل كتكون فيه الغبره ولا دوز شي حشره ودوز فوق منه، حيت الزعفران حساس بزاف. ملي كنقادوه في الشوشوار تقريبا كنريقلو على الوقيته فاش بغينا.
السلام عليكم. أزول 30 هجر، لاج ولا السن 19 سنة. تعلمنا تقريبا ديك بين 9 سنين 10 سنين، كنا غير كنمشيو معاهم للجنان كنشوفو، ما كنحيدوش، غير كنشوفو كيفاش كيحيدو. مرة كنحيدوهم، مرة لا كنعرفش لاش باقيين صغار. ولكن فاش كنجيو للدار كنجلسوا المهم ثاني كنشوف فيهم ولكن فاش تعلمنا يعني تقريبا بين ديك 12 13 هكاك.
دابا الزعفران نشف باش نفيريفوه نعرفوا كيف داير ياك ما فيه شي حاجه ولا نقادو كامل ونشوفوا الريحه ديالو هي هذيك حتى اللون حتى هو بقى كيما هو في الاول غندوقوا اللوغو ديالو ياك ما تحرق ولا شي حاجه هو هذاك صافي. دابا عندنا هذا هو الزعفران راه دابا موجود للماكله. السلام عليكم. الفوائد ديال الزعفران كيصلح للبرد، كيصلح للتجميل بحال الوجه الشعر، كيصلح للبصر حتى هو للعينين. الحاجه الاخرى كاين اللي كيديروا على حسب الشرايين ديال القلب اللي كيحل الشرايين ديال القلب الى مسدودين ولا شي حاجه، ولكن ما تكثرش منه. الا كثرتي منه راه كيجري الدم بزاف، حتى الانسان يقدر يمشي للغيبوبه.
Well, from the 7th of August, places of worship in Nigeria's commercial capital, Lagos, will be allowed to hold in-person services. Until then, some Catholics in the city have been using a mobile app to attend services and schedule meetings with their priests. Asatal tells us more.
As Nigeria's churches remain closed due to the COVID-19 pandemic, O Sanctus is giving Catholics a chance to attend virtual services and book appointments with their priests. The app currently has over 3,000 subscribers.
It's a lot easier for people to schedule their time, what mass they want to attend, what time they want to visit, because the offices are not as busy as, and of course we're not in full business as they say.
O Sanctus has not only digitized 4 parishes, but also helped streamline meetings.
What the pandemic has done is for people to appreciate that these things can be done. I also don't see why I should get to the priest's office and sit for 2 hours. I'm a busy person. I don't want to get there and there are a whole lot of people and then I'm waiting.
Henry is a pharmacist and also an avid user of O Sanctus. He also has appreciated the quicker access to his priest.
It was a welcome development because it made so many things easy for us. Cut the gaps of trying to access the office sometimes. So you can do all of those from the convenience of your house.
While places of worship are set to reopen on August 7th for in-person services, they'll still have to follow restrictions, like operating at a 50% capacity and only holding services once a week. Astatal, CGTN.
A final look at the markets. Here's how currencies did today. South Africa's rand lost the most among currencies we track here. It crashed to its lowest level since early June, closing at 17 rands 55 to the dollar. That was a loss of almost 1.3%. And that's it from the team here at Global Business. Remember that you can send your feedback on the contacts that are on the screen. Thank you so much for joining us from me, Hannah Viviers. We'll see you next time.